Hello and welcome to Unit 6 in our early Latin American history course. As you can well see, we're almost through with the course at this point. Just a couple of weeks left. Please let me know if you have any questions as we're working toward the final projects. In this unit, we're going to cover what Restall and Lane refer to as the age of change. And so we're looking roughly at what they also call the long 18th century. The 1700s from just before the turn of that century to about the 1820s or 30s when a lot of the Spanish and Portuguese American independence movements had run their course and most had gained independence from Spain and Portugal. So by 1830, Spain and Portugal had lost the vast majority of their colonies in the Americas. And most of our class, we've been looking at the ways in which Spain and Portugal governed those colonies and created new kind of mixed race, heritage populations in those areas based on their colonial ideals and their colonial regimes, their religion, their ways of ordering life in terms of social class and race, the ways that gender impacted people's position in society, and so on. So we're going to begin this unit by looking at some of the reasons that the Spanish and Portuguese empires found themselves in a state of decline by the mid-1700s. And that decline had been ongoing for quite a while. In the Spanish Empire, especially, Spanish kings had been taking part in very costly wars of religion in Europe following on the Protestant Reformation. So throughout the 1600s then, the Spanish kings and queens stood as the defenders of Catholicism in Europe. They staunchly held to their Catholic roots. They wanted to root out all Protestants, and they fought wars across Europe to try to fortify that position. The Jesuit order, as a matter of fact, was connected with the Spanish Empire as well as the church, and it was a counter-Reformation order trying to not only convert indigenous peoples to Catholicism in the Americas, but also trying to push back against Protestant inroads into believing in the Christian faith. So the reason I bring that up is those wars, again, were very costly. The Spanish Empire spent a lot of money on conflicts that it gained nothing back from, essentially. Also, the Spanish Empire was not managed well. It was one of the most far-flung or largest in terms of overall geography and topography. And so try to imagine a king in Madrid looking out to the Americas, a place that he has never been, and also as far away as the Philippines, and trying to figure out how to administer all of those places. Early on, as we've seen earlier in the semester, Spanish kings created a system of overlapping jurisdictions that consisted of viceroys, governors, audiencias, which were essentially legislative bodies for different viceroyalties. They had kind of local level officials as well who sometimes had similar responsibilities. So for example, it was never exactly clear whether it was a governor's or a viceroy's or the audiencia's call on resolving issues of the encomienda, repartimiento early on. Also, by the late colonial period, people were buying and selling offices in the Americas, so there was a lot of corruption. So again, all of this points to the reasons that the Spanish Empire was in decline. By the late 1700s, Bourbon kings from the House of Bourbon, one of those European royal families, attempted to reform the empire. Their goals were to streamline public administration and to just totally redefine and stamp out corruption, redefine the ways that the empire was managed so that it could once again turn a profit, so that once again the Spanish Empire would be in the black instead of the red. That wasn't easy, but it was something that King Carlos III was able to accomplish through a number of different measures. One of those included expelling the Jesuits completely from all Spanish jurisdictions. As an analog to that, the minister, the Marquis de Pombal in Portugal, did the same thing in Brazil. So got rid of the Jesuits because their power was not just religious, but it was also political. It was also economic, and the Jesuits were sort of the most ostentatious in terms of displaying that power, in terms of challenging the state. So in order to reassert the power of the empire in both those places, Jesuits were expelled. Um, Additionally, streamlining public administration meant that there was no more purchasing of offices, and also that um, criollos, or creoles as I referred to in the book, lost a lot of positions to peninsulares. And we've talked about before, the only difference between those two groups of people was that peninsulares were born in Spain or Portugal. They were the ones who claimed that pure Spanish or Portuguese bloodline, but were born in Europe. By contrast, criollos, or creoles, were born in the Americas. They claimed the same kind of pure Spanish lineage. The only difference, they were born in the Americas. And they lost power to peninsulares who were appointed to be viceroys, or appointed to be governors, or appointed to audiencias by the king. The king liked this because, and he actually reformed some of those jurisdictions as well to create intendancies, as they were called, and he placed intendants in different positions of power as well, in order to have people who he knew, if not personally, through very close channels, administering the empire far away, so that he knew those people would be loyal to him. The problem, though, is that the criollos were put out by all of that. They lost access to wealth and power that they had formerly enjoyed. Most of them were able to maintain a place in local town councils, or cabildos. In places like New Mexico, they were called ayuntamientos. And they used that position of power to reassert their power once again when the Age of Independence began. So in order to put all of that into context and kind of the worldview, there were a lot of different wars going on in Europe that we've already alluded to, but also the American independence movement was successful by 1783. Also, the French Revolution took place in 1789 and throughout the 1790s. And so conflicts and new ideas from the Enlightenment about liberalism, about the freedom of the individual, about kind of pushing off the shackles of institutions like the church, and being able to think freely and openly and have certain freedoms, such as the right to assemble, the freedom of speech, freedom of the press. Those ideas were gaining more and more credence throughout the Spanish Americas as well, as people there watched what had happened in the United States and in France. It was Napoleon's efforts, as you'll read about, so I won't go into detail, that kind of pushed the Spanish Americas and the Portuguese Americas toward independence. Within the context of that, by the late colonial period, there were indigenous people who were pushing back against the Bourbon reforms and the Pomba Line reforms that I've alluded to, and as well as the criollos. There are also criollos who were able to join forces with indigenous people, with impoverished mestizo people, to rise up against the government in the late colonial era. A lot of the people who held power in Mexico City and Lima in particular didn't like the idea of having liberal governments, and so they actually fought independence for quite a while until it became clear to them in 1820 that the King of Spain was going to enact a more liberal constitution that would change the status quo for them. In Peru and Mexico then in the 1820s, early 1820s, independence movements took on a very conservative nature. In other places like Buenos Aires and in the northern part of South America, what Simón Bolívar envisioned as El Gran Colombia, liberal ideals were the heart of the independence movements. So these were not conservative efforts, but instead they were attempts to completely change, not only who was in charge, but also the social and economic standings of people within the new nations that had been carved out of the colonial areas. So hopefully that gives you just kind of a brief overview so that you can put together everything in the readings. The Andrean readings, I think, this time around are particularly good, talking about the purchase of whiteness, as well as movements toward independence in the late colonial era. So I hope that you enjoy Unit 6. Please let me know if you have any questions.